The neon sign above the Hillcrest gas station flickered weakly, barely visible against the darkened sky. The air was thick with the stench of gasoline, blood, and something far worse, the rotting flesh of the dead that clawed and moaned just beyond the station's shattered windows. Inside, a group of 5 survivors huddled together, catching their breath after a frantic escape. Ethan, a former mechanic, gripped a crowbar tightly, his knuckles white. Mia, a college student, nervously checked her revolver, counting the few bullets she had left. Jonas, an ex-cop, leaned against the counter, his leg bleeding from a deep cut. Riley, a mother clutching her young son, Noah, held the boy close, whispering reassurances despite the terror in her own eyes. They were trapped. "That door won't hold forever," Ethan muttered, eyeing the boarded-up entrance. The planks creaked under the weight of the undead, their grotesque hands reaching through cracks, their teeth gnashing in blind hunger. "Then we need to find a way out," Mia said. "Maybe there's a back door." "There isn't," Jonas cut her off, wincing as he adjusted his wounded leg. "Already checked. Only way out is through them." Riley held her son closer. "There has to be another way," she pleaded. "We can't just sit here and wait to die." Jonas exhaled sharply. "We could wait it out. Maybe they'll lose interest and move on." Ethan shook his head. "They don't just move on. You've seen what happens when people try to hide. Sooner or later, they get in." A sudden crash made them all jump. One of the windows buckled, a jagged crack splitting through the glass. The zombies outside moaned louder, sensing their prey. "We don't have time to argue," Mia said, stepping forward. "We need a plan." Jonas pushed himself up, grimacing in pain. "First, we check supplies. Food, water, weapons, whatever we have left." Ethan nodded and moved toward the storage area while Mia checked the shelves. Most of the snacks and bottled drinks had been ransacked long ago. What little remained wouldn't last more than a day. Jonas peeled back the sleeve of his blood-soaked jeans, revealing the deep gash on his leg. The sight made Mia's stomach twist. "It's not a bite," he assured them, but Ethan and Riley exchanged doubtful glances. Mia took a deep breath. "Okay, let's be smart about this. Maybe we can find a way to draw them away." "You mean send someone outside as bait?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. Mia hesitated. "I mean, maybe we could make noise somewhere else. Like, throw something?" Jonas let out a bitter chuckle. "And then what? Run? Where?" Silence fell over them. The truth was inescapable, they were stuck. Then, the station lights flickered and cut out completely. Darkness. Noah whimpered, burying his face in his mother's chest. "What the hell?" Ethan whispered. A low hiss filled the room. Jonas stiffened. "Do you smell that? Gas. The underground fuel tanks, something must have cracked. One spark and the whole place would go up in flames." Ethan's face went pale. "We need to get out of here. Now." Mia peeked through the back storage room and saw something that made her blood run cold. A shadow moved in the dark corner, something was inside with them. "We're not alone," she whispered. The others turned, fear creeping into their eyes. Then, from the back of the store, a low growl rumbled through the darkness. The moans outside intensified, the undead becoming more frenzied as if sensing the danger wasn't just inside, but among them. The darkness inside the gas station felt as suffocating as the mass of undead pressing against the boarded-up entrance. The sudden growl from the storage room sent a wave of fear through the group. Mia gripped her revolver, heart pounding. "There's something back there," she whispered. Ethan tightened his grip on the crowbar and exchanged a glance with Jonas. The ex-cop was sweating, his injured leg barely holding his weight. He nodded toward Ethan. "You check it out. I'll cover you." Ethan moved cautiously toward the storage room, stepping over broken glass and debris. The hissing reek of gasoline filled his nostrils. Every step he took felt like an invitation for something to lunge at him. Then, a shuffle. He raised his crowbar, swallowing hard. "Who's there?" A figure stumbled into view from the darkness. At first, he thought it was a zombie, its movements sluggish, its breathing ragged. But when the emergency light flickered on for a second, Ethan saw the pale face of a man, barely alive, clutching a bleeding wound on his stomach. "Help," the man rasped, eyes glassy with pain. He collapsed onto his knees. Mia stepped forward. "Oh my God, he's alive." Ethan cursed under his breath and bent down. The man looked terrible, his clothes were soaked in sweat, his skin pale. Riley pulled Noah behind her, keeping him away from the stranger. "Who are you?" Jonas asked, barely able to stand. The man coughed weakly. "Derek," he mumbled. I was hiding in the back when. I thought you were one of them." Ethan and Mia exchanged glances. Derek wheezed. "Please. I need help." But Ethan's gaze moved to the deep gash across Derek's abdomen. It was nasty, red, raw, and suspicious. Mia's stomach tightened. She had seen wounds like that before. Jonas' wound was from an accident, but this one? It looked like a bite, Ethan whispered. Derek tensed. "No. It's not." Ethan's hand gripped the crowbar tighter. "Don't lie to me." The others fell into stunned silence. Even Noah, too young to understand the full horror of their situation, could feel the shift in the air. Jonas clenched his jaw. "If he's bitten, we can't let him stay." Mia hesitated. "But what if it's not a bite? What if we're wrong?" Jonas shook his head. "We can't take the risk." Riley spoke up, her voice shaking. "But we can't just kill him either." Ethan glared at Derek. "How did you get that wound?" Derek's breathing grew shallow. His gaze darted to the door, then to the boarded-up windows. I was attacked, but it wasn't a bite. I swear." "Liar," Jonas spat. "You're sweating, shaking, and pale. You know what happens next." The undead outside pounded harder on the gas station. The sound sent chills through the group, a cruel reminder that time was slipping away. Derek suddenly lunged forward, grabbing Mia's arm. "Please. I'm not infected." His nails dug into her skin. "Don't throw me out there. I'll do anything. Please." Mia gasped, yanking herself free. Jonas reached for his gun, but his hands were shaking. Too slow. Ethan acted first. With a sickening crack, his crowbar slammed against Derek's skull. Derek collapsed. Mia clamped a hand over her mouth. Riley turned away, shielding Noah's eyes. Jonas exhaled. You killed him." Ethan's jaw was tight. "I did what needed to be done." Silence. Then, bang. A window shattered. The zombies were getting in. They had wasted too much time. And now, there was no more waiting. The crash of breaking glass sent a jolt of terror through the survivors. The undead had found a weak spot in the boarded-up windows, and now rotting hands clawed their way inside. Their moans filled the gas station like a chorus of death. Ethan spun toward the sound. The window near the snack aisle had been breached. A zombie was halfway through, its decayed face twisted in mindless hunger. "Block it!" Jonas barked, trying to push himself up despite his injured leg. Ethan didn't hesitate. He swung his crowbar, smashing the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. It didn't stop moving. Its teeth snapped wildly, inches from his face. Mia fired her revolver. Bang! The zombie's head snapped back, and it slumped forward, motionless. But there were more. Too many. "We need to get out of here," Riley said, her voice trembling as she clutched Noah to her chest. Ethan backed up, his breathing ragged. "No kidding. But how?" Jonas pointed toward the back. "The service door. If we can get it open." "Are you kidding me?" Mia interrupted. "You said yourself there's no way out back there." Jonas gritted his teeth. "That was before we had a choice between trying and dying." Another board snapped, and more hands reached through the growing gaps in the barricade. "We don't have time to argue," Ethan shouted. "Move!" They ran toward the back of the gas station. Every second counted. The storage room, a dead end? The air in the storage room was thick with the pungent smell of gasoline and blood. Mia tried not to look at Derek's lifeless body on the floor as they rushed past. Ethan reached the back door and yanked the handle. It didn't budge. "It's locked," he cursed. Jonas stumbled forward. "Move." He fumbled with his belt, pulling out a rusty keyring. "You had the keys this whole time?" Mia hissed. Jonas didn't answer, he just jammed a key into the lock, twisting violently. Click. The door creaked open an inch. Then, a deafening screech. Something was outside. Jonas froze. It wasn't a zombie moan. It was something fast. Mia peeked through the crack and saw movement in the darkness. Not slow, not shambling, but running. "Shit," she whispered. Ethan looked confused. "What? What is it?" Mia swallowed hard. "Runners." The words sent a chill through the group. Riley's grip on Noah tightened. "No, please, no." Runners weren't like the normal undead. They weren't slow, mindless husks. They were fresh. And they could hunt. Jonas quickly shut the door and locked it again. "We can't go this way." Mia's stomach turned. "So what now?" "We're trapped between them and..." Crash. The front of the gas station gave way as the zombies poured inside. A desperate call for help. "We're out of options," Riley cried. Ethan's head whipped around, scanning for anything that could save them. Then he saw it. A two-way radio on the counter. He ran for it, grabbing the receiver. Static buzzed through the speaker. "Hello? Hello? This is Ethan. There are 5 of us trapped at the Hillcrest gas station. The place is being overrun. We need help. Is anyone out there?" Silence. The others held their breath. Then, a voice. A gruff, static-laced voice crackled through. "Who is this?" Ethan nearly collapsed from relief. "We're survivors. We're trapped. Can you help us?" The voice was calm. Too calm. "You got weapons?" Ethan hesitated. "Some. Not enough." A long pause. Then the voice replied, "Sit tight. Help's on the way." The radio went dead. Ethan stared at it. "Hello? Are you still there?" "Nothing." Mia's eyes narrowed. "Something's not right." Riley's voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you think they're actually coming?" Jonas looked toward the shattered front of the gas station. "We don't have a choice," he said. "We either wait for them, or we fight our way out." Outside, the undead were swarming. And in the distance, something else was coming. Something worse. The gas station was no longer a refuge, it was a death trap. The undead had breached the front, their grotesque bodies pouring inside like a relentless tide. The back door wasn't an option either, something fast was lurking outside, waiting. And now, they had no idea if the voice on the radio was friend or foe. Mia clenched her revolver. "We need a new plan. Fast." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. "Only options are fight or hide." Jonas exhaled sharply, his leg wound throbbing. "Hiding is useless. They'll find us." Riley, clutching Noah, shook her head. "We can't fight them all. We'll die." Noah whimpered, his tiny voice cutting through the tension. "I don't want to die, Mommy." Riley shushed him gently, trying to stay strong. The moaning grew louder. The horde was getting closer. And then, a new sound filled the air. A hissing noise. Mia's nostrils flared. "Do you smell that?" Ethan's eyes widened. Gasoline. Jonas's gaze darted to the supply shelf near the counter. A can of fuel had been knocked over, spilling its contents across the floor. And Ethan realized something even worse. The electrical wires above the counter were exposed, sparking dangerously close to the spreading gasoline. "Oh, hell," Ethan muttered. If one of those sparks hit the gas, the whole place would explode. Jonas caught on immediately. "We need to get out. Now." Mia looked toward the zombies flooding in through the front. "Through where?" "In case you forgot, we're surrounded." Ethan turned toward the storage room. "There's a garage door in the back, right? Where they used to unload shipments." Jonas nodded. "Yeah, but it's rusted shut. It won't budge." Ethan's grip on his crowbar tightened. "Then we make it budge." The desperate escape. Ethan led the charge, shoving a shelf over to slow the zombies down. They sprinted into the storage room, Noah clinging tightly to Riley. The garage door loomed ahead, heavy, rusted, and barely holding together. Ethan wedged his crowbar under the bottom and heaved. "Help me lift this thing." Jonas, despite his injury, hobbled forward and grabbed the other side. Mia joined in, using all her strength. The metal groaned. It barely moved. The zombies were coming. Riley spun around. "They're almost here." Jonas gritted his teeth, his face pale from blood loss. "Put your back into it." Mia let out a frustrated cry as she pushed harder. The garage door lifted a few more inches. Just enough to squeeze through. "Go! Go!" Ethan ordered. Riley dropped to the ground, pushing Noah through first. "Baby, crawl as fast as you can." Noah scrambled under. Riley followed, sucking in her stomach to fit through the gap. Jonas went next, grunting in pain as he dragged himself under. Mia turned to Ethan. "You first." Ethan shook his head. "I'll hold it." "Go." Mia hesitated but obeyed, rolling under the opening. Ethan took one last look at the storage room. The zombies were almost on him. The gas fumes were suffocating now. He threw himself onto the ground and rolled under the gap. Just as the first zombie reached for him. Boom! Flames and shadows. The explosion tore through the gas station, a massive fireball erupting into the sky. The force of the blast sent Ethan and the others tumbling across the pavement. Mia's ears rang. She could barely hear her own breathing. She forced herself up, vision swimming. The gas station was a blazing inferno, flames licking at the night sky. Jonas groaned beside her, coughing from the smoke. Riley was hugging Noah, both trembling but alive. Ethan pushed himself up, his arm burned, but otherwise okay. They had survived. But then, a noise. Not from the fire. Not from the zombies still trapped inside the flames. From behind them. Mia turned slowly. And her heart nearly stopped. The things from the radio weren't zombies. But they weren't human either. A group of figures stood in the darkness beyond the burning gas station. Watching. Some were holding guns. Others had blades. The voice from the radio had said, "Sit tight. Help's on the way." But now, looking at the menacing shapes in the darkness, Mia realized. They might have just escaped one nightmare. Only to walk straight into another. The heat from the flames engulfed the survivors, but the chilling presence of the figures in the shadows sent a far colder shiver down their spines. Ethan's heart raced as he scanned the group of strangers standing just beyond the firelight. There were 5 of them, all dressed in ragged clothing, weapons drawn, their faces hidden in the darkness. The glow from the blaze illuminated only their silhouettes, but it was enough to see they weren't here to offer comfort. Riley stepped in front of Noah, her protective instincts kicking in. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaky but defiant. One of the figures, a man in a tattered military jacket, stepped forward. His face was obscured by a dark mask, but his eyes gleamed with a cold, calculated intensity. "We were sent," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "To make sure you're not a threat." Ethan's grip tightened around his crowbar. "A threat? We're just trying to survive." The man didn't flinch. He nodded toward the inferno behind them. That fire? We were watching. Your chances of survival just dropped to 0. Jonas limped forward, wincing with each step. What do you want from us? The figure looked at Jonas and then scanned the others. His gaze lingered on Noah for a moment before returning to Ethan. I want you to prove you're worth saving. Mia stepped up beside Ethan, her expression hard. Prove? We didn't ask for your help. The man's eyes narrowed, and a shiver ran down her spine. You didn't ask for it, but you got it. Now, you're gonna pay your debt. The bargain. Ethan exchanged a glance with Mia, and then with Jonas. There was no way out. They were in no condition to fight, the horde was still inside the gas station, and the explosion had made it clear that their chances of getting any help were slim. All right, Ethan said, reluctantly. What do you want? The masked man smiled, a dark and unsettling smile. There's a safe zone. Not far from here. But it's not free. You'll work for us. Mia's eyes narrowed. Work? For who? The man's smile faded, replaced by a cold, emotionless stare. For the ones in charge. The outcasts. Riley's eyes widened. The outcasts? You're with them? The man didn't answer. Instead, he motioned toward the rest of his group, who stepped forward, their weapons still trained on the survivors. We'll be moving out soon, the man continued. And we'll be watching you. If you're gonna survive, you'll do it our way. Jonas looked from the stranger to Ethan, his face drawn. And if we refuse? The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, Ethan saw something like amusement in his eyes. Then you won't be needing to worry about survival anymore. We'll leave you to the horde. Riley flinched. The thought of being left behind was too much to bear. Noah held onto her tightly, as though sensing her unease. Fine, Ethan said, his voice tight with frustration. We'll go with you. But if anything happens to my family, you'll regret it. The man's lips curled into a grim smirk. A threat? You're in no position to make threats, survivor. Mia clenched her fists, but Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling her to remain calm. They had no choice. The walk to the safe zone. The group of strangers didn't waste any time. They immediately set off toward the dark horizon, the fire from the gas station growing smaller and smaller in the distance. The survivors, Ethan, Mia, Jonas, Riley, and Noah, followed closely behind, their bodies still stiff from the shock of the explosion. As they walked, the masked man kept a few steps ahead, his sharp eyes never leaving the survivors. Behind him, the others were silent, occasionally glancing over their shoulders but making no effort to speak. The night was eerily quiet, with only the distant moans of the undead and the crackling of the fire still ringing in their ears. The world around them felt more alien with each step they took into the unknown. After what felt like hours of walking through the desolate wasteland, the leader of the group finally spoke. Safe zone's close now. You'll have shelter. Food. Water. His voice had a detached quality to it, as if he were discussing something far removed from human life. Ethan glanced at Mia, who was trying to keep Noah from getting too tired. What's the catch? The leader didn't turn around but spoke anyway. The catch is simple. You work for your place in the outcasts' world. You help us, or you don't eat. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You expect us to trust you after what happened at the gas station? The man didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was colder than ever. Trust is earned. You'll have to prove you're not a burden. Jonas limped beside Ethan, his voice barely a whisper. This isn't the help we thought it would be. No, Ethan agreed, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. But it's our only option right now. The safe zone. After several more minutes of tense silence, they reached a cleared area surrounded by high fences and guard towers. It was a fortified settlement, secure from the horrors of the outside world. The survivors' hope flickered. For a brief moment, it felt like they had found safety. But the moment they entered the gates, their hope came face to face with a much darker truth. The settlement was not a sanctuary. It was a prison. The gates creaked shut behind them, the loud clang echoing in the cold night air. The survivors stood in a dusty courtyard, surrounded by high, barbed wire fences and watchful guards perched in towers. The outcasts' safe zone wasn't as safe as it seemed. As they walked deeper into the compound, they were herded like cattle through narrow, concrete hallways, each step feeling heavier than the last. The masked man, the leader, led them with an air of authority, and his companions followed silently, their eyes scanning the survivors as if they were prey to be monitored. Ethan's jaw clenched, his fists still tight around his crowbar. The unease that had been growing since they arrived at the gas station was now a knot in his stomach. This was not the refuge they had hoped for. Mia kept her eyes on Noah, her protective instincts flaring. He was holding her hand tightly, sensing the shift in atmosphere, his small body trembling slightly. Riley walked beside them, her gaze darting nervously between the guards and the empty, barren buildings around them. "What is this place, really?" she whispered to Ethan. Ethan swallowed. "This doesn't feel like a safe zone. This feels like a trap." Jonas, who had been limping along silently, spoke up, his voice hoarse from the journey. "They told us we had to earn our keep. But how much are they really going to let us keep?" The leader didn't respond, but his cold gaze flicked over his shoulder toward them. "You'll find out soon enough." They were led into a small building on the edge of the compound. Inside, there were several shackled prisoners, their eyes hollow and defeated. It was a chilling sight. These weren't survivors trying to rebuild. These were broken souls. Ethan's stomach twisted. The leader's words echoed in his mind, "You work for your place in the outcasts' world. You help us, or you don't eat." The price of survival. The survivors were thrown into a dark, cold cell with a single cot in the corner. The door clanged shut behind them, locking them in with a sense of finality. They were now part of this squalid world, whether they wanted to be or not. Ethan dropped onto the cot, his body exhausted from the journey and the chaos of the gas station. The day had taken everything from him. His body ached, his heart felt heavy, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. Mia sank to the floor beside him, Noah in her lap. She rocked him gently, trying to comfort him in this new, unsettling place. Riley sat beside them, her face pale and weary. Jonas limped over to the barred window, peering through it into the sprawling compound outside. "They won't let us leave," he muttered. "We're trapped here." "We have to stay calm," Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We don't know what they're going to do yet." But Mia wasn't convinced. "I don't like this, Ethan. They're keeping us here for a reason. They don't want to help us, they want to use us." Ethan's eyes met hers. "We don't have a choice. We survive here, or we die out there." But the doubt lingered. How much longer could they keep up this illusion of safety? The outcasts seemed to have their own rules, their own world. They weren't interested in sheltering people, they were interested in using them. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside their cell. The leader appeared at the bars. "Your work starts tomorrow," he said flatly. "You'll meet with the others then." Jonas scoffed from the corner of the room. "What kind of work?" The leader's lips twitched, but it wasn't a smile. "The kind that makes you earn your food. Earn your place. The work begins." The following morning, they were let out of their cell and into a sprawling workyard within the compound. A row of scruffy survivors was already hard at work, digging, building, and hauling heavy materials. They had clearly been here for a while, their faces sunken, their bodies thin. The hope was gone from their eyes. Mia scanned the scene, dread creeping into her bones. This is slavery," she whispered. Ethan's fists clenched. "This isn't a safe zone. This is just another tribe of people trying to survive at any cost." Jonas's voice was quiet, but laced with bitterness. "And we're just tools. They'll use us until we can't work anymore, then toss us aside." The leader approached them, his eyes cold and calculating. "Get to work." the walls won't build themselves. A rough hand grabbed Ethan's shoulder, pushing him toward the pile of debris that needed to be sorted. The others were separated, each assigned a different task. As Ethan bent to his task, lifting heavy planks of wood, he realized one painful truth: this place wasn't just about surviving, it was about maintaining control. The outcasts didn't care about rebuilding a community. They cared about ensuring their own survival. The rest of them were expendable. Mia was sent to the same section, her face tight with silent anger as she picked up scattered tools. Riley worked nearby, her movements sluggish but steady. Noah, now in the care of one of the other women in the compound, was kept out of sight as the survivors worked. The work was grueling, exhausting, and thankless. Every task seemed designed to break their spirit bit by bit, as if the outcasts were trying to turn them into machines, stripping them of their humanity. But as the sun began to set and they were herded back to their cells, one question lingered in Ethan's mind. Was it worth surviving in this place if it meant losing who they were in the process? A glimmer of hope. That evening, as the survivors sat in their cold, dark cell, Mia caught Ethan's eye. "I saw something today," she said, her voice low. "A group of prisoners. They were talking. And one of them." Her voice trailed off, her eyes glinting with something akin to hope. Ethan leaned in, intrigued. "What about them?" Mia hesitated, then whispered, "I think some of them are planning an escape." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Escape?" Mia nodded. "We need to find out more. There has to be a way out of here." Jonas overheard and added, "If we can get out of here, we can make our way back into the wasteland. But we need to act fast." The flame of hope flickered again. But Ethan knew one thing: getting out of this prison wasn't going to be easy. The outcasts had everything they needed to keep control. The question was, would they survive long enough to escape? To be continued. The days bled together in the compound, each one mirroring the last: long, brutal work shifts followed by cold, silent nights. The survivors, though worn and weary, had become increasingly aware of the danger they were in. There was no doubt now, the outcasts were not offering salvation. They were offering control, and that was something Ethan could no longer tolerate. That evening, as the survivors returned to their cells, Mia's words from earlier rang in Ethan's ears. There was hope, a plan to escape, but it was still in the early stages. They had to be careful. Mia pulled Ethan aside, her voice low and urgent. "I spoke with one of the prisoners again today. They have a way out. There's a weak spot in the fence near the back of the compound. But we need to wait for the right moment." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. "When do we move?" "Tomorrow," she whispered. "We'll have to act fast. If the outcasts catch wind of it, we won't get another chance." Ethan felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. Risk it all to escape this hell, or stay and play their game? The choice was clear. The long wait. The next day, as the survivors worked under the watchful eyes of the outcasts, the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew something was about to happen. Even the outcasts seemed to sense the shift, their movements more deliberate, their eyes sharper. Ethan found himself glancing frequently toward the far corner of the compound, the place where the weak point in the fence was located. It seemed so far away, yet so close at the same time. The workday dragged on. Mia kept her distance from the others, speaking only in low whispers to Jonas, who was growing more and more restless by the minute. The prisoners who had been talking about the escape were working near the back of the compound, their actions subtle, but their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Ethan could feel the sweat on his brow, the oppressive weight of the outcasts' control bearing down on them. The guards walked by, their guns slung over their shoulders, unaware of the rebellion slowly building beneath their noses. Riley's face was grim as she worked beside Ethan, her movements slower than usual. She was worried, they all were. She leaned in toward Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we can actually get out of here?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His mind was a whirl of thoughts. The outcasts had far more weapons and manpower than they did. It felt like an impossible mission. But the alternative, being used until they were no longer useful, was worse. "We have to try," he said at last, his voice low and determined. "We can't stay here forever." The moment of truth. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness settled over the compound, the survivors gathered in their cells, nerves taut with anticipation. Ethan sat in the corner of the room, his mind racing. The escape was planned for midnight, when the guards would be at their least vigilant. The weak spot in the fence was the only chance they had. Mia, Jonas, and Riley exchanged quick glances before turning their attention to Noah, who was already asleep, oblivious to the danger around him. For a moment, the group just stood there, the weight of what they were about to do sinking in. This was their last shot. Mia knelt beside Ethan. "We move fast. We stick together. If anything goes wrong, we don't look back." Ethan nodded. "Got it. Let's get out of here." Jonas took a deep breath, adjusting his makeshift weapon, a rusty pipe he'd picked up during their work shift. "I'll lead the way." Riley checked her own weapon, a jagged piece of metal she had found in the yard. Her eyes were cold, focused. "We have to get to the fence first. Once we're there, it's just a matter of cutting through." The sound of footsteps echoed outside their cell, and they froze, hearts in their throats. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. But the footsteps passed, and the chance to move came. The escape begins. With the precision of a well-oiled machine, the survivors slipped out of their cell, moving swiftly through the dark corridors of the compound. They were silent, every step calculated. The guards, seemingly unaware, continued their patrols, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows across the compound. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as they neared the back of the compound. The weak spot in the fence was just ahead, hidden behind a pile of debris. Jonas motioned for everyone to stop as he crouched down, carefully lifting the debris to reveal the damaged section of the fence. It wasn't much, a small gap, just large enough for them to squeeze through if they were careful. "Almost there," Jonas muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. Ethan's fingers itched to move. This was it. Their moment of escape was right in front of them. But the sounds of the compound seemed to grow louder, more ominous. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching them. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out in the distance. The sound shattered the stillness of the night. "Go!" Ethan shouted, his heart in his throat. The group moved in a blur, crawling through the gap in the fence, one by one. Riley was the first to make it through, followed by Mia, then Jonas. Ethan went last, his eyes scanning the darkness, waiting for the inevitable pursuit to start. Once they were through, they stumbled into the wilderness, breathless and shaken. But as they turned to look back, they saw the lights of the compound flickering behind them, signaling that they were free, at least for now. The hunt begins. They ran. Through the open fields, past the broken remnants of old vehicles, their feet pounding the earth beneath them. But the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. They weren't alone. The outcasts were coming. They knew what it meant for anyone to try to escape. "Keep going!" Ethan shouted. "We can't stop now." The sound of hunting dogs could be heard in the distance, followed by the unmistakable crack of gunfire. The outcasts were close, and they wouldn't stop until the survivors were caught. But hope burned in their chests. They had made it out. And as long as they kept running, there was still a chance to survive. To be continued. The survivors had been running for what felt like hours, but the sound of the outcasts' pursuit was relentless. The dogs were growing closer, their howls cutting through the night like a warning. Their breath came in ragged gasps, exhaustion settling deep in their bones, but the fear of being recaptured drove them forward. Ethan's mind raced, calculating their options. The outcasts wouldn't stop, not until they had every last one of them back in their grasp. The group was already tired, and Noah was growing increasingly upset. Mia had been carrying him for as long as she could, but even she was beginning to falter under the weight of their flight. Riley, looking back over her shoulder every few seconds, gripped her makeshift weapon tightly, determined not to be caught. Jonas, though wounded and limping, was doing his best to keep pace. But they couldn't keep running forever. They had to find a way to turn the tables. Up ahead, Riley called out. "There's a building. We can take cover there." Ethan looked in the direction she pointed. Through the darkness, he could make out the silhouette of an old, decrepit warehouse in the distance. It wasn't much, but it was something they could use to make a stand. "Let's move," he shouted, and the group veered off their current path, heading for the warehouse. The last stand. The old warehouse was falling apart, its rusted doors hanging loosely, but it offered them a brief respite from the relentless pursuit. They entered cautiously, their footsteps echoing on the cracked concrete floor. Inside, the warehouse was littered with broken crates, old machinery, and forgotten remnants of a world that had long since fallen apart. It wasn't ideal, but it was defensible. They could use the debris to create barriers, set up a makeshift defense. Ethan looked around quickly, assessing their surroundings. There was a second-floor catwalk, a few rusty pipes they could climb, and a stack of old crates they could hide behind. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "We'll split up," Ethan said. "Mia, Riley, take the back. Jonas, you and I will cover the front." Jonas nodded grimly, taking his position near a pile of old barrels. Riley grabbed Mia's arm and led her to the back of the warehouse, setting up a crude barricade of broken crates and steel pipes. Ethan took his place by the front entrance, weapon in hand. The others followed suit, each of them preparing for the inevitable showdown. They knew the outcasts would be here soon, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill to keep their control. Noah, still in Mia's arms, was terrified but silent, sensing the gravity of the situation. Mia whispered to him, her words soft but determined, "We'll make it through this. I promise." The minutes dragged on, the silence almost suffocating. The only sound was the distant echo of the outcasts' pursuit, their footsteps growing nearer with each passing moment. Ethan's eyes darted around the warehouse, searching for any sign of movement. The outcasts had to be close. The final confrontation. Suddenly, a flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. The sound of voices drifted in from outside the warehouse, the unmistakable command of the outcasts' leader cutting through the night. "Spread out," the leader barked. They couldn't have gone far. Ethan's heart raced. The time was now. He signaled to the others, and they prepared themselves for the fight. The outcasts were closing in, and there was no turning back. The first of the outcasts entered the warehouse, a burly man, holding a rifle. He stepped cautiously, scanning the shadows for any sign of life. Ethan held his breath, waiting for the right moment. The man moved closer to the center of the warehouse, his back to Ethan. The second he stepped into the open, Ethan lunged from his hiding spot, slamming into the man with all his weight. The rifle went flying, and they both crashed to the ground. Riley and Mia were ready too. As the rest of the outcasts stormed in, they took down two more, fighting with every ounce of strength they had left. But there were too many. Ethan fought with everything he had, but the outcasts kept coming, pushing the survivors back inch by inch. Jonas fought bravely, his injured legs slowing him down, but he didn't give up. Mia screamed as one of the outcasts tried to grab Noah. Riley shouted, rushing to protect them both. In the chaos, the warehouse felt like it was spinning. There was no clear winner, no victory, just the overwhelming sense of desperation. A glimmer of hope. As the fighting intensified, Ethan's eyes caught sight of something, a gun on the ground, just out of reach. He couldn't risk being pinned down, he had to get to it. He crawled toward the weapon, his body sore and bruised, fighting against the pull of exhaustion. A loud crash echoed as a large metal beam fell nearby, nearly crushing him, but he reached the gun, and with a trembling hand, he gripped it tightly. With renewed strength, Ethan turned to face the remaining outcasts. "Back off," he shouted, his voice hoarse but full of defiance. For a brief moment, there was hesitation. Then, from the darkness, the outcast's leader appeared. His eyes locked with Ethan's, a knowing look crossing his face. He saw the weapon in Ethan's hand, but more than that, he saw the determination in his eyes. You really think you can escape? The leader sneered. You're all nothing but prey in this world. But before the leader could make another move, a loud gunshot rang out. One of the prisoners who had escaped with the group earlier emerged from the shadows, wielding a gun they had taken from one of the guards. The leader stumbled, the bullet hitting him in the shoulder. He fell back, his men scrambling in confusion. Now, it was their chance. Ethan didn't hesitate. We run, he shouted. Now! With the outcasts in disarray, the survivors bolted for the back of the warehouse, where the fence still loomed in the distance. They didn't stop to look back, only focused on the one goal, freedom. As they neared the fence, a final thought flashed through Ethan's mind: they had made it out. They had won. For now. The end of the road. As the survivors emerged from the compound and into the dark wilderness, they looked back only once. The outcasts were still recovering, still in shock, but they weren't following. Not yet. But for Ethan, Mia, Jonas, Riley, and Noah, this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The world outside was still a nightmare, a land ravaged by the undead, by chaos, by betrayal. But as they took one last breath of fresh air, they knew one thing for certain: they were free. For the first time in a long while, they felt something they hadn't felt in forever: hope. And in this new world, hope was the only weapon that mattered. The end.